The demolition crew had been working on the old diner for 3 days when they found it. March 17, 1967. A cold Tuesday morning in Mill Haven, Indiana. The excavator's claw had just ripped through the concrete foundation when the operator saw something that made him kill the engine. Bones. Human bones. Dozens of them, embedded in the soil beneath what used to be Esther's diner. Within hours, the quiet highway stop became a crime scene. State police cordoned off the entire property. Detective Lawson Merrick stood at the edge of the excavation pit, staring down at the skeletal remains. 5 years of missing persons cases suddenly made terrible sense. But to understand how those bones ended up there, we need to go back. Back to 1962, when Esther's Diner was the most welcoming place on Highway 41. Esther Veilland was 42 years old in the summer of 1962. To the people of Mill Haven, she was the perfect neighbor. Always smiling, always ready with a fresh pot of coffee and a kind word. Her diner sat at the intersection of Highway 41 and County Road 7, a small brick building with a red and white striped awning and a neon sign that buzzed through the night. Truckers knew it. Travelers relied on it. The coffee was strong, the pie was homemade, and Esther remembered everyone's name. But beneath that warm smile lived something cold, something broken. Esther had grown up in Gary, Indiana, in a house where love came with conditions and punishment came without warning. Her father, a steel worker with calloused hands and a taste for bourbon, had taught her that the world was divided into 2 types of people, those who control and those who are controlled. By the time she was 16, Esther had decided which one she would be. She met Cormac Veilland in 1943 at a USO dance in Chicago. He was 39 in 1962, a thin man with nervous hands and eyes that never quite met yours. Where Esther was fire, Cormac was smoke, shapeless, directionless. Desperate for someone to tell him who to be. Esther had recognized that desperation the moment she saw him. It was useful. They'd bought the diner in 1958 with money Esther had saved from her previous job at a hospital in Hammond. Cormac worked the grill. Esther handled everything else: the business, the books, the decisions. Their marriage worked the same way. Esther decided. Cormac obeyed. To their neighbors, they were the ideal couple, childless but devoted to each other, hardworking, church-going. Every Sunday, they sat in the 3rd pew at Mill Haven Methodist, Esther's gloved hands folded in her lap, Cormac's fingers drumming anxiously on his knee. The diner itself was simple: 10 stools at the counter, 4 booths along the windows, a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people, and upstairs, above the dining room, a small apartment where Esther and Cormac lived. 2 rooms and a bath. But there was also a basement, a deep, cool basement that Esther had insisted on when they bought the place. For storage, she'd told Cormac, for keeping things fresh. The basement had a concrete floor and cinder block walls. Cormac had installed the plumbing himself, under Esther's supervision. A large sink, a drain in the center of the floor, and along the far wall, 3 large ceramic tubs that Esther said were for laundry. She was very particular about those tubs. By the summer of 1962, Esther's Diner had become a fixture in Mill Haven. The regulars came every morning, old men who'd worked the same factory jobs for 30 years, housewives who met for coffee and gossip, Sheriff Harlan Bixby, who took his lunch at the counter every Wednesday and Friday, always ordering the meatloaf special. But Esther had begun to feel something growing inside her, a hunger that the diner couldn't satisfy, a need that Cormac's anxious devotion couldn't fill. She would watch the travelers who stopped for gas and directions. Young women mostly. Alone. Far from home. Nobody waiting for them. Nobody who would ask questions if they didn't arrive. She would smile at them, pour their coffee, ask where they were headed, and she would think about what it would feel like to have that kind of power. Complete power. The power to decide whether someone lived or died. Cormac noticed the change in his wife, though he couldn't name it. She was distracted, restless. At night, she would stand at the bedroom window, staring out at the highway, watching the headlights pass. When he asked what she was thinking about, she would turn to him with that smile that never quite reached her eyes and say, "Nothing, darling. Just watching the world go by." But Esther Veilland was thinking about everything. She was planning, preparing, waiting for the right moment, the right person. Someone who wouldn't be missed. Someone whose disappearance would barely make the papers. And on August 14th, 1962, that person walked through the door of Esther's diner, and everything changed. Her name was Delilah Crowe, and she walked into Esther's diner just before closing time on August 14th, 1962. 23 years old. Dark hair in a ponytail, everything she owned in a canvas duffel bag. She looked exhausted from walking in the summer heat. "We're about to close, honey," Esther said warmly. "But sit down. I'll get you something to eat." Delilah smiled with relief. "Thank you. I've been walking since Terre Haute. Nobody's stopping to give rides." "Where you headed?" Esther poured coffee, studying the girl carefully. "Chicago. Got a friend there who can get me work." Delilah wrapped her hands around the cup. No wedding ring, no visible photographs. The duffel bag looked half empty. This girl was alone, completely alone. Esther brought out meatloaf and mashed potatoes. Delilah ate like she was starving. Esther watched her, feeling that cold hunger grow inside. She glanced at Cormac, wiping down the grill. He wasn't paying attention. "Listen," Esther sat down across from her. "We've got a guest room upstairs. You could stay the night. Get some rest. There's a bus in the morning that stops right across the street." Delilah looked up, surprised. "I couldn't. I don't have much money." "Don't worry about money. Call it Christian charity." Esther's smile was perfect. "A young woman shouldn't be on that highway alone at night. It's not safe." Delilah accepted. Esther showed her to the small room upstairs. Clean sheets, a window facing the highway, a lock on the door that Esther had disabled months ago. "Sleep well, dear. Breakfast starts at 6. Downstairs, Cormac was finishing dishes. "What are you doing?" His voice shook. "We don't rent rooms." Esther opened a locked cabinet. Inside was a brown bottle labeled Seconal, sleeping pills she'd been collecting for months. "Esther?" Cormac stared at the bottle. "What is that for?" She looked at him hard. "Do you love me, Cormac?" "Of course." "Do you trust me?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Then you'll help me. Because if you don't, I'll tell everyone about Gary. About what you did in 1956. About that girl." Cormac went white. There had been no girl. No incident. But his constant anxiety made him believe her instantly. "What do you want me to do?" he whispered. Esther crushed 6 pills into powder, mixed them into warm milk with honey and cinnamon. At 10 o'clock, she knocked on Delilah's door. "I thought you might want this," Esther said kindly. "Helps me sleep in strange places." Delilah drank it all, thanked her, closed the door. Esther waited in her apartment. Cormac sat on the bed, head in his hands. The clock ticked. 1 hour passed. "It's time," Esther said. The guest room door opened silently. Delilah was unconscious on the bed, breathing slowly. Esther felt electric joy surge through her. Pure power. "Help me," she told Cormac. They carried Delilah down the back stairs, through the kitchen, down to the basement. Cormac was crying, but he didn't stop. Esther had him now. In the basement, one ceramic tub was filled with clear liquid, sulfuric acid, industrial strength. Esther had stolen it from the hospital years ago, stored it carefully, waiting for this moment. Delilah never woke up. Esther wrapped her hands around the girl's throat and squeezed, felt the pulse stop, watched the life drain away, and felt more alive than ever. Cormac vomited in the corner. The body went into the acid. Esther knew it would take days, but eventually nothing would remain but bones, small enough to bury beneath the foundation. They went upstairs as sunrise came. Cormac couldn't speak. Esther made coffee, started biscuits. At 6 a.m., she unlocked the front door and flipped the sign to open. Sheriff Bixby came in for coffee. Old Man Henderson wanted scrambled eggs. Everything was normal. Everything was perfect. And in the basement, Delilah Crow was disappearing. 3 days later, Esther buried what remained beneath the crawl space. Cormac helped dig. He didn't speak anymore, just obeyed. Esther had broken something inside him that night, and she knew he would never refuse her again. She kept Delilah's duffel bag, burned the clothes, but kept a small silver bracelet, a trophy. She hid it in a box in their bedroom closet. At night, she would take it out and hold it. Remember that moment of power, and plan for the next one. 2 months passed before Esther found her second victim. October 1962. The leaves were turning gold and red along Highway 41, and the diner stayed busy with travelers heading south before winter came. Esther had become patient, careful. She watched every woman who came through the door, studying them like a hunter studies prey. Most weren't right. Too many connections. Too many people who would ask questions. But on October 29th, Maribel Teslo walked in, and Esther knew immediately. Maribel was 28, a traveling saleswoman for a cosmetics company. She wore a smart gray suit and carried a heavy sample case. She sat at the counter and ordered coffee, looking tired but professional. "Long day?" Esther asked, pouring. "Long week. I've been covering the whole southern Indiana territory. My regular partner quit, so it's just me now." Maribel stirred sugar into her coffee. "Company doesn't care. They just want the sales numbers. No partner." Esther's interest sharpened. "That must be lonely." "It is, but the money's decent." Maribel showed Esther her order book, pages of names and addresses, all spread across 3 counties. "I'm supposed to be in Evansville tomorrow, but honestly, I'm exhausted. Is there a motel nearby?" "Closest one is 15 miles south, but you know we've got that guest room upstairs. Clean and quiet. $20 for the night, breakfast included." Maribel looked relieved. That would be perfect. This time Esther knew exactly what to do. The same warm milk, the same crushed pills, the same patient wait. But when they carried Maribel down to the basement, Cormac didn't cry, didn't vomit. He just helped. Silent and efficient. Esther had trained him well. Maribel's sample case went into the incinerator behind the diner. Her car, parked out back, Cormac drove to a ravine 20 miles away and pushed it over the edge. The order book burned. The gray suit dissolved with the body. Esther kept a gold compact from the sample case, added it to her box of trophies. The third victim came in March 1963. Vivian Lassiter, 31 years old, a nurse traveling to her sister's wedding in St. Louis. She'd taken a week off from the hospital in Fort Wayne, told her supervisor she needed the break, told her roommate not to expect her back until the following Monday. Vivian was different from the others, smarter, more observant. When Esther offered the guest room, Vivian hesitated. "That's very kind, but I should probably keep driving. I want to make St. Louis by tomorrow." Esther adjusted quickly. "Of course, honey, but at least take some coffee for the road." "On the house." The coffee had the seconal mixed in. Not enough to knock her unconscious immediately, just enough to make her drowsy. 15 miles down the highway, Vivian would pull over, fall asleep, and Cormac, following in their truck, would find her. It worked perfectly. Cormac brought her back to the diner wrapped in a blanket. Esther was waiting in the basement. Vivian never woke up, never knew what happened. Her car went to a different ravine. Her suitcase burned. Esther kept a silver nurse's watch, added it to the box. By the spring of 1963, something had changed in Esther. The hunger was never satisfied anymore. Each killing brought that electric rush, that sense of absolute power. But it faded faster each time. She needed more, needed it more frequently. Cormac had changed too. He no longer questioned, no longer hesitated. He'd become an extension of Esther's will, a tool she used. Sometimes she caught him looking at the box of trophies with something that might have been fascination. The weakness in him had found something to attach itself to. He was addicted to her, to this. They developed routines, signals. Esther would place a red dish rag on the counter when she'd selected a victim. Cormac would prepare the basement. They worked together like partners in a terrible dance. The diner prospered. More travelers, more regulars. Sheriff Bixby still came for his Wednesday and Friday meatloaf. Still joked with Esther about her coffee being strong enough to wake the dead. The irony was lost on him. No one suspected. How could they? Esther and Cormac Veilland were pillars of the community. They donated to the church, sponsored the local Little League team. Esther organized bake sales for charity, and beneath their diner, the crawl space filled with bones. July 1964. The summer heat pressed down on Millhaven like a weight. The diner's air conditioning barely worked, and Esther stood behind the counter, fanning herself with a menu, watching the highway shimmer in the afternoon sun. She hadn't killed anyone in over a year, not because she didn't want to. The hunger was always there, gnawing at her. But she'd become cautious. Too many killings too close together would create a pattern. Esther was smart enough to know that patterns got people caught. But on July 18th, when Odette Grimshaw walked through the door, Esther's patience evaporated. Odette was 26, a school teacher from Kentucky, traveling to visit colleges in Illinois. She wore a modest blue dress and cat-eye glasses, carried a leather satchel full of books and teaching materials. She ordered iced tea and sat in the corner booth, grading papers while she waited for her food. Esther brought her a turkey sandwich and watched her work. "You're a teacher?" "5th grade, English and history." Odette smiled, pushing her glasses up. I'm thinking about going back to school, getting my master's degree. There's a program at the University of Illinois that looks promising. By yourself? That's brave. My fiancé doesn't understand why I need more education. Says teaching elementary school is enough. Odette's smile faded. We had a fight about it. I told him I was going to look at the program anyway. He said if I did, the engagement was off. No fiancé waiting, no one expecting her back on a specific date. Esther's pulse quickened. Well, sometimes we have to choose ourselves, Esther said warmly. Good for you. How long are you planning to be gone? A week? Maybe 2? I want to visit a few different schools. See what feels right. Odette took a bite of her sandwich. Is there a place to stay nearby? I'm tired of driving. The red dish rag went on the counter. That night, Odette drank the drugged milk, thanked Esther for her kindness, went to sleep in the guest room, and never woke up. But this time was different. This time Esther wanted Cormac to do it, to prove his loyalty completely, to cross the final line. In the basement, with Odette unconscious on the floor, Esther handed Cormac a length of rope. Your turn, she said quietly. Cormac stared at the rope. His hands shook. Esther, I can't. I've helped you. I've done everything else, but I can't. You can. And you will. Because we're in this together now, Cormac. All the way. If I go down, you go down. You're just as guilty as I am. He was crying, but he took the rope. It took him longer than it took Esther. His hands kept slipping. He had to stop twice. But eventually, Odette's pulse stopped. And when it did, Cormac collapsed on the floor, sobbing. Esther felt nothing but satisfaction. Now he was truly hers, bound not just by fear, but by blood. They disposed of the body the same way. Acid, burial, burning her belongings. But Esther kept Odette's glasses, the cat-eye frames. They went into the trophy box with the bracelet, the compact, and the nurse's watch. The next morning, as they were cleaning the basement, Cormac found something on the floor near the stairs. A small gold earring, shaped like a teardrop. It must have fallen from Odette's ear during the struggle. I'll put it with the others, Cormac said. But he didn't. He put it in his pocket, meaning to add it to the box later. And then he forgot. When he wore those pants 2 days later to take out the trash, the earring slipped out near the dumpster behind the diner. He didn't notice. Esther didn't notice. But the earring stayed there, half buried in the gravel, glinting in the sun. The first mistake. The first crack in their perfect system. In town, people were starting to talk. Not about murders. Not about the diner. But about Highway 41. About how it seemed like people disappeared along that stretch of road more often than they should. Old Henderson mentioned it one morning over coffee. My cousin's girl went missing last year. Was driving through here on her way to Chicago. Never made it. Police said she probably just ran off, but it don't sit right. Sheriff Bixby laughed it off. People run off all the time, Henderson, especially young folks looking for something better. Nothing sinister about it. But Esther heard, and she felt a small flutter of concern. Not fear, not yet, but awareness. The invisible was becoming visible. The pattern was forming. She would need to be more careful, wait longer between kills, choose better. But the hunger was getting stronger. And Esther Veilland wasn't sure she could stop, even if she wanted to. Spring, 1965. Detective Lawson Merrick sat in his office at the Indiana State Police Headquarters in Indianapolis, staring at a map of the state. Red pins marked locations. 12 of them. 12 women who had disappeared over the past 3 years along a corridor of highways in southern Indiana. Merrick was 41 years old, a veteran investigator with 15 years on the force. He'd seen his share of missing persons cases. Most resolved themselves. Runaways who came home, women who left bad marriages, people starting new lives. But these 12 cases bothered him. They didn't fit the usual patterns. He'd started noticing the connections by accident. A report from Fort Wayne about a missing nurse, another from Terre Haute about a saleswoman, a teacher from Kentucky. When he plotted them on the map, they formed a line. Highway 41. All of them had been traveling along or near Highway 41. Merrick picked up his phone and called the Mill Haven Sheriff's Office. Sheriff Harlan Bixby answered on the third ring. "Bixby, this is Detective Merrick, State Police. I'm looking into some missing persons cases in your area. You got time to talk?" "Sure, Detective. What do you need?" Bixby's voice was friendly, but cautious. "I've got reports of several women going missing along Highway 41 over the past few years. They were all passing through your jurisdiction. Did you work any of those cases?" Bixby sighed. "We get reports now and then. People who don't show up where they're supposed to. But honestly, most of them probably just changed their minds. Went somewhere else. Young people do that. 12 women, Sheriff. 12 in 3 years. All along the same highway corridor. That seem normal to you?" "Highway 41 is a busy road, Detective. Thousands of people travel through here every month. 12 out of thousands. That's a pretty small percentage." Merrick heard the defensiveness in Bixby's tone. Small-town sheriffs didn't like state police, suggesting they'd missed something. "I'd like to come down and review the files. See if there's anything we're missing. You're wasting your time, but suit yourself." 2 days later, Merrick drove to Mill Haven. The town was exactly what he expected. One main street, a few shops, a grain elevator. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and strangers stood out. The sheriff's office was a small brick building next to the courthouse. Bixby met him at the door, shook his hand without much warmth, and led him to a back room where he'd pulled the relevant files. "There's not much here," Bixby said. "Like I told you, most of these cases went nowhere. No evidence of foul play, just people who didn't arrive where they said they were going." Merrick spent 3 hours reading. Delilah Crow, Maribel Teslo, Vivian Lassiter, Odette Grimshaw. 4 of the 12 had been reported as last seen in or near Mill Haven. The others were scattered along Highway 41 in neighboring counties. "Did you interview anyone? Business owners along the highway? Gas station attendants?" Bixby shrugged. "We asked around. Nobody saw anything unusual. These women probably stopped for gas or food, then kept driving. Could be anywhere by now. Or they could be dead." "That's a hell of an assumption, Detective." Merrick looked at the sheriff carefully. Bixby was in his mid-50s, overweight, comfortable. He'd been sheriff for 20 years, running unopposed in the last 3 elections. This was a man who didn't want problems, who didn't want headlines about serial killers in his quiet town. "I'm opening an official investigation," Merrick said. "I'll need copies of these files." Bixby's jaw tightened. "You do what you need to do, but you're chasing ghosts." That afternoon, Merrick drove along Highway 41, stopping at every business, gas stations, diners, motels. He showed photographs of the missing women, asked if anyone remembered seeing them. Most people shook their heads. It had been years. Thousands of faces passed through. How could they remember? But at Esther's diner, when Merrick walked in just before the lunch rush, something changed. Esther was behind the counter pouring coffee for regulars. She looked up when Merrick entered, and her smile was automatic, professional. But her eyes were calculating. "Afternoon. Sit anywhere you like." Merrick sat at the counter. "Coffee, please, and whatever the lunch special is." Esther poured. "Passing through?" "Actually, I'm working. State Police." He showed his badge. "Detective Lawson Merrick. I'm investigating some missing persons cases. Women who disappeared along this highway over the past few years." Esther's expression didn't change. "That's terrible. How can I help?" Merrick pulled out 4 photographs: Delilah, Maribel, Vivian, Odette. "Any of these women look familiar? They might have stopped here for food or gas." Esther studied each photo carefully. Too carefully. "I see hundreds of faces every week, Detective. I'm sorry, but I don't recognize them." "This was years ago?" "Between 1962 and 1964? "That's a long time. I wish I could help." She set the photos down and smiled sadly. "I hope you find them." Merrick watched her walk away to take another order. Something felt wrong. Not obviously wrong, just off. The way she'd looked at the photographs. The precise way she'd answered. Too smooth. Too prepared. He ate his lunch slowly, observing. Esther moved through the diner with practiced efficiency, friendly with customers, quick with refills, and in the kitchen, visible through the service window, a thin man worked the grill, never looking up, never engaging. When Merrick paid his bill, he asked, "You and your husband run this place alone?" "That's right. Cormac and I bought it in 1958. It's been our whole life. Must be hard work." "We love it. Keeps us busy." She handed him his change. "Good luck with your investigation, Detective." As Merrick walked to his car, he glanced back at the diner. Esther stood at the window, watching him leave. Their eyes met for a moment before she turned away. Back in Indianapolis, Merrick requested approval to open a formal investigation. His captain was skeptical but agreed to give him resources. 1 junior detective, access to county records, permission to pursue leads. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Merrick pinned a new marker on his map, right on Millhaven, right where Esther's diner sat at the crossroads. He didn't have evidence yet, didn't have proof. But 15 years of police work had taught him to trust his instincts. And his instincts told him Esther Veilland was hiding something. Fall 1966. 15 months had passed since Detective Merrick opened his investigation. 15 months of dead ends, missing records, and witnesses who remembered nothing. The case was slowly dying from lack of evidence, and Merrick knew it. His captain had already suggested closing it twice. "You've got nothing, Lawson. No bodies, no witnesses, no physical evidence, just a bunch of women who probably ran off to start new lives. Let it go." But Merrick couldn't let it go. He'd driven Highway 41 dozens of times now, interviewed hundreds of people. And every road led back to Millhaven, back to that diner with the red and white awning. He'd run background checks on Esther and Cormac Veilland. Both clean. No criminal records. No suspicious history. Esther had worked as a hospital administrator in Hammond before buying the diner. Cormac had been a line cook at various restaurants. They paid their taxes, attended church, model citizens. But Merrick had learned something interesting. In the 3 years before they bought the diner, Esther had worked in the hospital's supply department. She'd had access to chemicals, industrial cleaners, medical supplies, and there'd been a small investigation in 1957 about missing inventory. Sulfuric acid, several gallons unaccounted for. The investigation had gone nowhere, chalked up to paperwork errors. It wasn't proof, but it was something. In October 1966, Merrick got his first real break. A highway maintenance crew was repairing the shoulder along Highway 41, just outside Millhaven. One of the workers found something in the gravel behind Esther's diner. A small gold earring, teardrop-shaped. The worker brought it to Sheriff Bixby, thinking maybe someone had lost it. Bixby tossed it in his desk drawer and forgot about it. But when Merrick came by 2 weeks later for another review of the files, he saw it. "Where'd this come from?" Bixby looked up from his coffee. "Oh, that? Maintenance guy found it behind the diner. Probably just trash. Women lose earrings all the time." Merrick picked it up carefully, examined it. Quality gold, well made, not costume jewelry. "You mind if I take this? Be my guest. Don't see how it helps you." Merrick drove back to Indianapolis with the earring in an evidence bag. He pulled Odette Grimshaw's missing persons report. Her fiancé had provided a description of jewelry she'd been wearing: a watch, a ring, and gold teardrop earrings. It wasn't definitive proof. Thousands of women owned similar earrings. But combined with the location, the timeline, the fact that Odette had last been seen near Millhaven, it was enough for Merrick to request surveillance authorization. His captain approved 2 weeks of observation. Merrick couldn't do it himself without being recognized, so he brought in Detective Raymond Kolchak from the Gary office. Younger, unknown face. Kolchak would pose as a traveling salesman and watch the diner. Kolchak started his surveillance in early November. He rented a room at a motel 15 miles south and drove past the diner multiple times daily. Stopped in for meals, observed the patterns. What he saw was unremarkable. Esther and Cormac ran a normal business. Customers came and went. Regulars had their usual spots. Nothing suspicious, nothing unusual. But Kolchak noticed small things. The way Cormac never made eye contact with customers. The way Esther watched every woman who came in alone. The way she asked questions. "Where are you from? Where are you going? Who's expecting you?" He also noticed the basement door. Always locked. Esther kept the key on a chain around her neck. On November 19th, Kolchak saw something that made him call Merrick immediately. A young woman had come into the diner late in the afternoon. Alone, carrying a suitcase. She'd talked with Esther for several minutes. Then Esther had shown her upstairs. "She's got someone staying in the guest room," Kolchak said over the phone. "Young woman, early 20s, been up there for 2 hours now. Stay on it. Don't lose sight of that building." Kolchak watched through the night. His car parked across the highway, hidden behind a closed gas station. The lights in the diner went out at 10. The upstairs apartment stayed lit for another hour. Then darkness. At 2 a.m., Kolchak saw movement. The back door opened. Cormac came out, looked around, then went back inside. 5 minutes later, he came out again carrying something wrapped in a blanket. Kolchak's hand went to his radio. But before he could call it in, Cormac put the bundle in the back of a pickup truck and drove away. Headed south on Highway 41. Kolchak had a choice. Follow the truck or watch the diner. He chose the diner. If something was happening, Esther would still be there. But nothing else happened. The diner stayed dark. At 6 a.m., lights came on. The ovens flipped. Esther started her morning routine. Kolchak went inside for breakfast. The young woman from yesterday was gone. He asked Esther about her casually. "Oh, the girl? She only stayed one night. Caught the early bus to Indianapolis." Esther poured his coffee, smiling. "Sweet thing. Hope she makes it okay." Kolchak reported everything to Merrick. They checked the bus station. No young woman matching the description had bought a ticket that morning. They checked with neighboring police departments. No reports of abandoned vehicles. No missing persons reports filed yet. But it was too soon. Sometimes it took days or weeks for someone to be reported missing. Merrick requested an extension on the surveillance. His captain denied it. "You've got nothing but speculation. A guest who left early and a man carrying a blanket. That's not probable cause for anything." But Merrick kept digging on his own time. He visited families of the missing women, showed them the earring. None of them could positively identify it, but Odette's fiancé looked at it for a long time. "She had earrings like this. I gave them to her for her birthday. But I can't swear these are the same ones." It wasn't enough. Merrick knew it. He needed more. A witness. A body. Something concrete. So he did something risky. Something that could cost him his badge if it went wrong. He started watching the diner himself, off-duty, in his own car, parked in different locations, watching, waiting, because Lawson Merrick knew what he was looking at. He'd worked enough homicide cases to recognize predators, and Esther Veilland was a predator. He just needed to prove it. January 1967. The coldest winter in 20 years had settled over Indiana. Snow piled high along Highway 41, and the traffic slowed to a crawl. Esther's Diner became a warm refuge for frozen travelers, and business was better than ever. Esther knew the detective was watching. She'd spotted Merrick's car 3 times in the past month, parked at different locations, but always with a clear view of the diner. She'd also noticed the younger detective in November, the one who'd asked too many questions about the girl who'd never actually existed. Esther had invented that story on the spot, knowing they were watching. She should have stopped. Should have waited years before killing again. But the hunger had become unbearable, and Esther's arrogance told her she was too smart to get caught. She'd been doing this for 5 years. 5 years without a single mistake that mattered. The earring didn't matter. They couldn't prove anything with an earring. On January 14th, Rose Callahan walked into the diner at 7 in the evening. 25 years old. Red hair pulled back in a braid. She wore a heavy coat and looked exhausted from driving in the snow. "Thank God you're still open," Rose said, stamping snow from her boots. "I've been driving since Ohio. The roads are terrible." Esther poured hot coffee. "Where you headed, honey?" "St. Louis. My sister's getting married next week. I'm the maid of honor." Rose wrapped her hands around the cup. "But I don't think I can drive anymore tonight. My car's sliding all over the road. Is there a motel nearby?" Esther felt the familiar rush, but she hesitated. Merrick was out there somewhere, watching. She should send this one away, should wait. But Rose was perfect, alone, tired, vulnerable, and the snow would cover tracks, make investigation harder. "We've got a room upstairs," Esther heard herself say. $30, includes breakfast. Rose smiled with relief. "Perfect." At 9 o'clock, Esther brought up the warm milk. Rose drank half of it, then set it down. "This is delicious. What's in it?" "Just honey and cinnamon. Family recipe." Esther watched her carefully. Rose should be getting drowsy by now. But Rose kept talking, kept moving. The Seconal wasn't working fast enough. Esther had used the same dose as always, but Rose was bigger than the others. Healthier. It wasn't enough. "I should probably call my sister," Rose said, standing up. "Let her know I'm stopping for the night." "The phone's downstairs in the office. Come on, I'll show you." Esther led her down the back stairs, through the kitchen, toward the basement door. Rose followed, talking about her sister's wedding, not noticing where they were going until Esther unlocked the basement door. "The phone's down there?" "Just through here." Esther's hand was on Rose's back, pushing gently. Rose stepped onto the first stair. Then she stopped. "Wait, why is the phone in the basement?" "Just come on, honey, it's—" Rose turned suddenly, and her elbow caught Esther in the chest. It wasn't intentional, just a reflexive movement. But Esther stumbled backward. Rose saw her expression, saw something in Esther's eyes that triggered every survival instinct. Rose ran, back through the kitchen. But Cormac was there, blocking the door. She turned toward the dining room, but Esther had recovered and was coming from that direction. "Cormac, grab her!" Rose screamed. The first victim who'd ever screamed. She threw a pot from the stove at Cormac, who ducked. Then she ran for the front door, locked. Esther always kept it locked after closing. Cormac caught her from behind, wrapped his arms around her. But Rose was fighting with everything she had. She bit his hand. He yelled and let go. She grabbed a knife from the counter. "Stay back! Stay away from me!" Esther and Cormac stood on opposite sides of the kitchen. Rose backed toward the door, knife shaking in her hand. She was fully alert now. The adrenaline had burned through whatever Seconal was in her system. "You were going to kill me," Rose said, her voice breaking. "Oh God, you were going to kill me." "Don't be ridiculous," Esther said, forcing her voice calm. "You're confused. The altitude, the driving, you're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking perfectly clear." Rose's hand found the deadbolt, turned it. "You're insane, both of you." She opened the door and ran into the night, into the snow, still wearing just her thin sweater. No coat, no shoes, but she ran. Esther started after her, but Cormac grabbed her arm. "Let her go. If we chase her, someone will see." "She'll tell them everything." "She doesn't know anything. She'll sound crazy, like she had a breakdown." But Esther knew better. Rose had seen the basement door, had felt Esther's hands pushing her toward it, had seen the truth in their eyes. She would tell, and eventually someone would believe her. "We need to run," Esther said. "Pack everything. Leave tonight." "And go where? We run now, we look guilty." Esther's mind raced. He was right. Running would confirm everything, but staying meant facing investigation, facing Merrick. They compromised. They cleaned, scrubbed the kitchen, locked the basement, burned Rose's coat and shoes in the incinerator. Esther hid the trophy box under the floorboards in their bedroom. Then they went upstairs and waited. Rose Callahan ran through the snow for 20 minutes before she saw lights. A farmhouse. She pounded on the door, sobbing, bleeding from cuts on her feet. The farmer who answered took one look at her and called the sheriff. Sheriff Bixby arrived 30 minutes later. Took Rose's statement. She told him everything. The diner, the Veillands, the basement door, the drugged milk. Bixby looked skeptical. "Mrs. Callahan, you've been through something traumatic. but what you're describing sounds like confusion. Maybe the stress of driving, the weather. I'm not confused. They tried to kill me. I'll go talk to them. But I'm sure there's an explanation. He drove to the diner, knocked on the door. Esther answered in her bathrobe, looking concerned. Sheriff? What's wrong? We've got a young woman at the Hendricks farm. Says she stayed here tonight. Says you and Cormac tried to hurt her. Esther's face showed perfect shock. The girl with red hair? She seemed agitated when she checked in. Nervous. I gave her some warm milk to help her sleep, but she ran out suddenly. I thought she just changed her mind about staying. Is she all right? She's making some serious accusations, Esther. Sheriff, you know us. We've never hurt anyone. The poor girl seemed troubled. I hope she gets help. Bixby wanted to believe her, wanted his town to stay quiet and safe. I'll put it in my report, but if she files formal charges, we'll have to investigate. Of course, we'll cooperate fully. But when Bixby left, Esther locked the door and looked at Cormac. Call Merrick. Tell him about the crazy woman. Make it our story before it becomes hers. They were fighting for their lives now. And Esther Veilland had never lost a fight. But she'd never faced anyone like Lawson Merrick. Detective Merrick got the call at 6 in the morning on January 15th. Not from Cormac Veilland. From the dispatcher at Millhaven Sheriff's Office. Detective, we've got a situation you need to know about. Woman named Rose Callahan claims she was attacked at Esther's diner last night. Sheriff took her statement, but he thinks she's confused. Thought you'd want to know, given your investigation. Merrick was in his car within 10 minutes. He drove through the snow at dangerous speeds, his heart pounding. Finally, he had a witness. Rose Callahan was at the hospital in the county seat, being treated for cuts and mild frostbite. When Merrick walked into her room, she was sitting up in bed, wrapped in blankets, her feet bandaged. Miss Callahan, I'm Detective Lawson Merrick, Indiana State Police. I need you to tell me everything that happened last night. Rose told her story. Every detail. The warm milk. The basement door. Esther's face when Rose realized what was happening. The chase. The escape. Sheriff Bixby didn't believe me, Rose said, her voice shaking. He made me feel like I was crazy. But I'm not crazy, Detective. They were going to kill me. I believe you, Merrick said. And I need you to be very brave now, because what you're telling me might be the key to solving multiple murders. You might have just saved more lives than your own. Rose started crying. Merrick gave her a moment, then continued. I'm going to need you to make an official statement. Everything you remember. And I'm going to need you to testify, eventually. Can you do that? Yes, I'll do whatever you need. Merrick spent 2 hours with Rose, going over every detail. Then he drove to the state prosecutor's office, presented his entire case, the missing women, the pattern, the earring, and now, Rose's testimony. It's enough for a search warrant, the prosecutor said. Maybe not enough for an arrest yet, but definitely enough to search that diner. By noon, Merrick had his warrant. He assembled a team, 6 state police officers, a forensics unit, and reluctantly, Sheriff Bixby, who was required to be present for any search in his jurisdiction. They arrived at the diner at 2 in the afternoon. The lunch rush was over. Only 3 customers remained. Esther was behind the counter. Cormac was in the kitchen. Merrick walked in first, warrant in hand. Esther Veilland, Cormac Veilland, I have a warrant to search these premises. Esther's face went pale, but her voice stayed steady. On what grounds? Attempted murder. Suspicion of involvement in multiple disappearances. Step away from the counter, please. The customers were escorted out. Esther and Cormac were separated. Esther in the dining room with 2 officers. Cormac in the kitchen with 2 more. Merrick and the forensics team headed for the basement. The door was locked. Merrick used bolt cutters. The lock snapped, and the door swung open. The smell hit him first. Chemical. Acidic. Wrong. He descended the stairs slowly, flashlight in hand. The basement was exactly what he'd expected, and worse than he'd imagined. 3 large ceramic tubs against the far wall. One was empty. One contained a clear liquid that made his eyes water when he got close. Acid. The 3rd tub was covered with a wooden board. "Get the photographer down here," Merrick called up. "And get hazmat. We've got industrial chemicals." Along another wall were shelves, cleaning supplies, tools, and a box. A small wooden box with a brass latch. Merrick opened it carefully. Inside were trophies, a silver bracelet, a gold compact, a nurse's watch, a pair of cat-eye glasses, and other items, rings, necklaces, small personal effects. "Jesus Christ," one of the officers whispered behind him. The forensics team photographed everything. Then they searched the crawlspace. It took 2 hours of careful excavation, but they found what Merrick knew would be there. Bones. Human bones. Scattered and partial, damaged by acid, but unmistakably human. Femurs. Ribs. Skulls. The remains of at least 4 individuals, possibly more. Upstairs, Esther sat perfectly still. She hadn't asked for a lawyer, hadn't said a word. Just watched the officers move through her diner with cold, calculating eyes. Cormac had collapsed. He sat on the kitchen floor, head in his hands, sobbing. When an officer tried to lift him up, he started talking. "I didn't want to. She made me. She said she'd tell everyone about Gary, about what I'd done. But I didn't do anything in Gary. There was no girl. But she said there was, and I believed her. And then it was too late. I'd already helped with the first one, and then I couldn't stop. She said we'd both go to prison. She said..." "Shut up, Cormac." Esther's voice cut through his rambling. "Don't say another word." But Cormac kept talking. Names tumbled out. Delilah, Maribel, Vivian, Odette. And others. Women Merrick hadn't even known about. 6 victims, maybe 7. "Cormac Veilland, Esther Veilland, you're both under arrest for murder." Merrick read them their rights. His voice was steady, professional, but inside he felt sick. 5 years. 5 years these monsters had been operating. They were handcuffed separately, led to different police cars. As Esther was walked past Merrick, she looked him directly in the eyes. "You think you've won?" she said quietly. "You think this ends with me in prison? But I'm not sorry. Not for any of it. I'd do it all again." "I know," Merrick said. "That's why you're never getting out." The diner was sealed as a crime scene. The news spread through Millhaven within hours. By evening, crowds had gathered on Highway 41, staring at the building where their neighbors had been killing people for years. Sheriff Bixby stood apart from the crowd, his face gray. He'd eaten lunch at that counter twice a week for 5 years, had joked with Esther about her coffee, had dismissed every warning sign. "I should have seen it," he said to Merrick. "I should have known." "They fooled everyone," Merrick said. "That's what predators do." But he knew Bixby was right. The sheriff's willful blindness had let the Veillands kill for years. How many lives could have been saved if Bixby had listened earlier? Esther and Cormac were transported to the county jail, held in separate cells, no bail. The prosecutor announced that evening that the state would be seeking the death penalty for both defendants. In her cell, Esther lay on the thin mattress and stared at the ceiling. No remorse, no fear, only anger that she'd been stopped, that Rose Callahan had survived. In his cell, Cormac curled into a ball and wept, not for his victims, but for himself. The trial would come, the reckoning would come, but for tonight the killing had finally stopped. Summer, 1967. The trial of Esther and Cormac Veilland began on July 10th in the county courthouse. It was the biggest case in Indiana's history. Reporters came from Chicago, Indianapolis, even New York. The courtroom was packed every single day. The prosecution was led by District Attorney Vernon Hastings, a career prosecutor known for his methodical approach and devastating cross-examinations. The defense had split. Esther refused a plea deal and hired Martin Keyes, an expensive lawyer from Chicago who specialized in impossible cases. Cormac took a public defender named Robert Marsh, who immediately began negotiating for a lesser sentence in exchange for testimony against Esther. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The evidence was overwhelming, but Hastings knew he needed to prove premeditation and intent. He needed to show the jury that these weren't crimes of passion or accidents. These were calculated, cold-blooded murders. The prosecution's case began with Rose Callahan. She took the stand on the second day, wearing a simple blue dress, her red braid over one shoulder. She looked directly at Esther as she was sworn in. "Miss Callahan, please tell the jury what happened on the night of January 14th, 1967. Rose's voice was steady. She described everything: the warm milk, the drowsiness she'd felt, the basement door, Esther's hands pushing her, the moment she realized she was going to die. What did you see in Mrs. Veilland's eyes when you turned around on those stairs?" Rose's voice dropped. "Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Like I wasn't even human to her. Like I was just a thing." Esther's lawyer objected repeatedly, but the damage was done. The jury had seen Rose, had heard her story, had understood that she was the one who got away. On cross-examination, Keyes tried to discredit her. "Miss Callahan, you'd been driving for hours. You were exhausted. Isn't it possible you misinterpreted Mrs. Veilland's kindness? That your own fatigue created paranoia?" "No. I know what I saw. I know what they tried to do." The next witnesses were forensic experts. They testified about the bones found in the crawl space. 5 individuals positively identified through dental records and bone structure: Delilah Crow, Maribel Tesleau, Vivian Lassiter, Odette Grimshaw, and a 5th victim, identified as Lenora Hayes, a hitchhiker who'd never been reported missing because she had no family. The experts described the acid found in the basement, how it was used to dissolve tissue, how the process worked. The jury looked sick. Then came the trophies. Each item was presented as evidence: the bracelet identified by Delilah's sister, the compact with Maribel's initials engraved inside, the nurse's watch that Vivian's roommate confirmed she'd been wearing, the cat-eye glasses that Odette's fiancé recognized immediately. These weren't random items, Hastings told the jury. These were prizes, souvenirs. Mrs. Veilland kept them to remember her victims, to relive what she'd done to them. On the 4th week, Cormac took the stand. He'd made a deal. life in prison instead of death, in exchange for full testimony against Esther. His lawyer had convinced him it was his only chance. Cormac looked broken, thin, gray. He wouldn't look at Esther as he was sworn in. "Mr. Veilland, did you participate in the murders of these 5 women?" "Yes." His voice was barely audible. "Did you act alone?" "No. Esther planned everything. She chose them. She prepared the drugs. She told me what to do." "Did she force you?" Cormac hesitated. This was the crucial question. "She manipulated me. Made me believe I'd done something terrible in the past. Made me think we were in it together. By the time I realized she was lying, it was too late. I'd already helped her." Hastings walked him through each murder, made him describe his role, made him admit his guilt. Then he asked the question that sealed Esther's fate. "Mr. Veilland, who killed these women? Who actually ended their lives?" "Esther. She did all of them. I helped move the bodies, helped dispose of them. But she was the one who killed them." Esther's face remained expressionless. But her hands, folded on the defense table, had gone white at the knuckles. On cross-examination, Keyes attacked Cormac viciously. "You're a coward, aren't you, Mr. Veilland? You're trying to save your own life by blaming everything on your wife." "I'm telling the truth. You helped murder 5 women, but now you want the jury to believe you were just a victim? That you had no choice? I was weak. She used that against me. Or maybe you were a willing partner. Maybe you enjoyed it just as much as she did." Cormac broke down crying. "I didn't enjoy it. I hated myself. I still hate myself. But I couldn't stop her. I was too afraid." The prosecution rested after 5 weeks. The defense had almost nothing. Keyes called character witnesses who testified that Esther had been a good neighbor, a generous donor to charity. But none of it mattered against the physical evidence and Cormac's testimony. Esther never took the stand. Keyes advised against it, knowing that Hastings would destroy her on cross-examination. But on the final day, before closing arguments, Esther insisted on making a statement. The judge allowed it. Esther stood, facing the jury directly. "I'm not going to apologize. I'm not going to beg for mercy. What I did with full knowledge and intent. Those women were weak. They trusted too easily. They made themselves victims. I simply acted on what they offered. If you want to kill me for that, go ahead. But don't pretend you're better than me. Every one of you has darkness inside. I just had the courage to embrace mine." The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel. Esther sat down, a small smile on her face. Hastings gave his closing argument the next day. "Esther Veilland wants you to believe she's some kind of philosopher, that she's brave. She's not. She's a monster who preyed on vulnerable women, who took pleasure in their deaths, who kept trophies like a hunter keeps mounted heads. The law is clear. Premeditated murder, multiple victims, no remorse. The death penalty is the only appropriate sentence." The jury deliberated for 3 hours. They found both defendants guilty on all counts. 5 counts of first-degree murder, kidnapping, conspiracy. The sentencing hearing was held a week later. The judge looked at Esther and Cormac with disgust. "You have shown no mercy to your victims. You will receive none from this court. Esther Veilland, Cormac Veilland, I hereby sentence you both to death by electric chair." Esther showed no reaction. Cormac collapsed. They were transported to separate prisons to await execution. The appeals process would take months. But everyone knew how this would end. Justice, finally, had arrived. The appeals took 8 months. Esther's lawyer filed motion after motion, but each one was denied. The evidence was too strong, the guilt too clear. Indiana's Supreme Court upheld the death sentences in February 1968. Esther and Cormac were held in separate facilities. Esther at the Indiana Women's Prison in Indianapolis, Cormac at the State Penitentiary in Michigan City. They were not allowed to communicate. Neither requested to see the other. In prison, Esther remained exactly as she'd been during the trial. Cold, unrepentant. She read books, wrote letters to newspapers that refused to publish them. She gave one interview to a psychiatrist studying criminal psychology. When he asked if she felt remorse, she laughed. Remorse is what weak people feel when they're caught. I'm not sorry for what I did. I'm sorry I was stopped. The psychiatrist asked if she understood why what she'd done was wrong. I understand that society says it's wrong, but society is made up of hypocrites who kill in wars, execute prisoners, eat animals. They just don't have the honesty to admit they enjoy the power. I was honest. That's my only crime. Cormac was different. He spent his final months in a state of collapse. He converted to Catholicism, confessed his sins to a prison chaplain daily, wrote letters to the families of the victims, begging forgiveness. None of them responded. His public defender visited him one final time. Cormac, there's still a chance. If you can prove diminished capacity, that Esther manipulated you psychologically. No more appeals. I want this to end. I deserve to die for what I did. Cormac Veilland was executed on March 15, 1968 at 12:01 a.m. He was led into the execution chamber at the Michigan City prison, strapped into the electric chair, given a chance for final words. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. God forgive me. He was crying. The chaplain stood beside him, praying. The switch was thrown. 2,000 volts. Cormac's body convulsed. It took 4 minutes. When it was over, he was pronounced dead. He was 44 years old. Esther Veilland's execution was scheduled for April 12, 1968. In her final weeks, she received hundreds of letters, some from people who hated her, some from disturbed individuals who admired her. She read them all with the same detached interest. Detective Merrick visited her 3 days before the execution. He didn't have to. The case was closed. But he needed to look her in the eyes one more time. Why did you agree to see me? He asked. Esther sat across from him in the visiting room, handcuffed, wearing prison gray. Curiosity. You're the one who caught me. I wanted to see if you felt proud of yourself. I feel satisfied that you can't hurt anyone else. But you wonder, don't you? How many others there might have been. How long I'd been thinking about it before I actually started. Whether I killed anyone before Millhaven. Merrick had wondered. The investigation had found evidence of only 5 murders, possibly 6. But Esther's confidence, her methodology, suggested practice. Did you? Esther smiled. You'll never know. That's my gift to you, Detective. Uncertainty. You can close the file on 5 victims, but you'll always wonder if there were more. That won't save you. I don't want to be saved. I'm just making sure I'm remembered. On April 12th, 1968, at 12:01 a.m., Esther Veilland walked into the execution chamber at the Indiana Women's Prison. She refused the chaplain, refused a final meal, asked only for a glass of water. She was strapped into the electric chair. The warden read the execution order. Esther Veilland, you have been sentenced to death for the murders of Delilah Crowe, Maribel Teslo, Vivian Lassiter, Odette Grimshaw, and Lenora Hayes. Do you have any final words? Esther looked at the witnesses, at the families of her victims who had come to watch her die, at Detective Merrick standing in the back. I lived more in 5 years than any of you will in your entire lives. Remember that. The switch was thrown. Esther's body stiffened. Her eyes stayed open, staring straight ahead, until the second surge of electricity stopped her heart. She was pronounced dead at 12:06 a.m. She was 47 years old. The diner was demolished in May 1968. The town council voted to buy the property and turn it into a small park. They installed a simple granite memorial with the names of the 5 known victims. No mention of the Veillands. They didn't deserve to be remembered. Rose Callahan moved to California. She changed her name, started a new life. She never gave another interview about what happened. The nightmares faded eventually, but she never stayed in motels, never accepted food from strangers, never fully trusted kindness again. Detective Lawson Merrick continued working for the state police until his retirement in 1982. The Veilland case remained the defining investigation of his career. In his final interview before retiring, a reporter asked if he believed Esther's claim that there were more victims. I believe she was capable of anything, Merrick said. But I also believe in evidence. We found 5 victims. We brought justice for those 5. That's what matters. But late at night, Merrick would sometimes pull out the old case files. Look at the map with the red pins. Wonder about the gaps, the stretches of highway where women had disappeared without explanation. He'd never know for certain. And maybe Esther had been right about that. Maybe uncertainty was her final victory. Highway 41 still runs through Indiana. Trucks still drive it. Travelers still stop at diners and gas stations. Millhaven is still a small town where everyone knows everyone. But the people who lived through 1967 remember. They remember that evil doesn't always look like evil, that monsters can smile and pour coffee and ask about your day, that the most dangerous predators are the ones you never see coming. The Memorial Park sits quiet most days, but on certain anniversaries, families come. They bring flowers. They speak the names of the women who died. Delilah Crowe, Maribel Teslo, Vivian Lassiter, Odette Grimshaw, Lenora Hayes. They were daughters, sisters, friends. They had dreams. They had futures. And they were stolen by 2 people who chose darkness over humanity. But they are remembered. And in being remembered, they are not forgotten. That is the final truth of this story. Not the horror of what happened, but the resilience of those who survived, the dedication of those who sought justice, and the memory of those who were lost. The Veillands wanted to be remembered for their power. Instead, they are remembered as cautionary tales, as proof that evil exists, but also as proof that evil can be stopped. Highway 41 still runs through Indiana, but the nightmare that haunted it for 5 years is gone, and the dead can finally rest.